Company of Makers. Podcast talks, workshops.
This series is dedicated to those who served in Telic and their families, marking the 20th anniversary of the commencement of operations. Each episode, we'll talk to members of the armed forces community who served in Telic, or whose lives have been directly impacted. These are true life accounts, and these personal stories may be emotionally challenging to hear. If you feel you may be sensitive to this, you may prefer not to listen.
Okay, Tip. I think it's about time we heard your dit, because a couple of our guests have obviously talked about this helicopter crash, which you've alluded to was quite important in your life. So let's hear it. What actually happened?
You've finally got me here then, Steve, because my reluctance, rather than me telling my full story, and you know what I'm like. It's not, I don't want to take my ego forward. It's purely a story about what actually I seen happen that night and the people that I operated with, which I was blessed in a lot of ways with. But the helicopter, as we've seen from people chatting, has been quite a focal point of that initial phase of operations in Iraq. So I think my story will, probably maybe educate people with, from somebody who was actually there when it happened.
Yeah, and how it affected you and how it affected those involved, and obviously the families of those that didn't come back. I mean, this is the reason why we're doing this podcast. I know it's not about you. I'm not suggesting it is for a moment, but I think this will add a bit of context and a bit of understanding.
Yeah, and I think I'm telling this story in this podcast because it is a celebration of those people that never came back, and I want people to listen to the story and savor the memories of those people that never made it back, and for those families that had to deal with the consequences of that night and of future operations both in Iraq and in Afghanistan.
Although unusually, this story starts in Afghanistan, doesn't it?
Yeah, for me, we deployed as a Brigade Recce Force. Basically, it started possibly before that from Kosovo. So that was the first operational deployment for 3 commander brigades, Brigade Recce Force, where I was a team commander. And then we came out of Kosovo in 2001, and then 9/11 happened. 9/11 happened, and when that actually happened, I was on a range with the Brigade Patrol Troop as part of the BRF in Wales. And we stood around a mini TV and watched the events in New York unfold. And looking at each other, we were all team commanders within the Brigade Patrol Troop. So we were in charge of a team of 6 Marines and Commando soldiers and sailors within the BRF. And we knew then that our lives were going to dramatically change in the coming weeks, months, not realizing it was going to be years also. So we, from the range, our first evolution would be an exercise called Exercise Royal Chamois, which is the concentration of all the brigade reconnaissance elements within 3 Commander Brigade. And that exercise we did in Scotland, focused initially based at Gairloch Head Camp outside Faslane, and then we advanced forward and inserted into the Isle of Skye for a confirmatory exercise. And that happened end of autumn, start of winter, October, November time in 2002. Yeah, that's right, 2002. And whilst we were up there, our commanding officer came up with the regimental sergeant major, and they informed us that there was a likelihood that we would be doing an allied joint operation and going into Iraq. And this was all discreet at the time. This is before Christmas. in 2002. After Christmas then, we started to get instructions, and elements of our Brigade Patrol Troop, or the Brigade Recce Force, went on board ship with the Inbox forces and 40 Commando Mason mainly, and they deployed by SEAL towards the Middle East. We flew out not long after they departed to Kuwait and started our build-up and our pre-training before, the invasion that potentially may happen or may not happen. And so we arrived in Kuwait January/February, I think end of January time. Our lead elements, which I was part of, we arrived and we began our training. Initially at Camp Commando near Kuwait City, I believe, if I can remember. And from there, we pushed out into the sort of newly built desert encampments, and we were based at Camp Gibraltar for the pre-invasion training as such. And that was it. We just went hell to pay on weapon training, first aid training. We'd done language training. We were pushing out. And then as the orders, or the contingency for the potential invasion, the contingency orders for the invasion was built up, we started to focus more of our training using the equipments we had and the vehicles we had in the likely operations that we would get. As it came closer to the time, mid-March, we were starting to receive our orders. And at the time, before we departed and the green light was given on the invasion, our orders were formed around our initial task would be to put in observation post screen using the Brigade Recce Force, which is a squadron level, maybe up to about 90 people. And the BRF at that time was made up of the Brigade Patrol Troop, which was mostly Royal Marines Commandos, and within that, your main disciplines were mountain leaders or specialists in reconnaissance, and snipers and advanced scout sniper trained individuals. And they're fundamental infantry reconnaissance and ISTAR assets, which is intelligence, surveillance, target acquisition, and reconnaissance, which is the new term that we were using or taking forward at that time. So within the BRF, we were initially ordered to put in a blocking screen. So I think we had up to 8 observation points, or OPs, and they would go forward of the whole battle area in between our friendly forces, who will be taking out targets on the south of the L4, and the Iraqi reinforcements potentials coming south from Basra. So we would put in a set of 6-man observation posts in discrete or covert locations, and as the reinforcements pushed south or towards to help the other Iraqi forces, we would engage them with both, mainly with aviation and air strike assets. So we had Cobra attack helicopters from the US Marine Corps, because at the time the brigade were under a 2-star, so general level command of the United States Marine Corps, even though we were part of an allied, movement. So we were control-wise at that level. Our brigadier was working to a 2-star US Marine Corps general. So we had their aviation assets, and that was why it came to the initial insertion would be carried out, we would be delivered into the battlefield as such by United States Marine Corps aviation or helicopters. That was the initial phase, and that insertion into that was going to be given, like I said, by the USMC, but there was going to be the biggest, what we were told at the time was the biggest helicopter operation since the Americans had done since the Vietnam War. And so we were part of it. That was the first set of orders, that was the first phase. Initial phase was the blocking screen, putting OPs in. Once this phase was complete and AZP, or L4 Tyne, and the manifold stations, or the stations that were going to be secured by the Navy SEALs, US Navy SEALs, and 40 Commando. Once that was secured, as Andy Merry spoke about, because he was part of that side of the operation. Once they were secured and the Tyne itself, L4 Tyne, was secure, then we would be withdrawn from our OPs, And we would then transfer our command as such from 4-2 Commando, which at that stage we were operational commander, OPCON, to 4-2 Commando. At that stage, then our command as such would be transferred to 40 Commando for the next phase. And that was under the command of Colonel Gordon Messenger, who is CEO of 40 Commando. And the next phase then would involve us remounting or getting into our vehicles, taking over our vehicles, redistributing our manpower or the people we had, and becoming a 2-troop squadron moving forward with a separate squadron and command element. And we would be the forward element moving forward, tracking up the L4 towards Basra, clearing positions. And that was the confirmed set of orders that we had. Inferred orders at this stage that we got through Jace Ward, who was the OC of the BRF at the time, inferred orders that from there was likelihood that would be used to secure the palace. Saddam Hussein's, well, it's not a single palace; it's a massive compound full of 7 different palaces, and we would be the element that would probably be the first ones to secure that. And that was inferred at the time. That wasn't a confirmed order. So at this point in time, before we stepped on the helicopter and moved off on the invasion, we had confirmed orders of setting up an OP screen and then followed by returning and moving forward with 40 Commando to clear the L4. So that was all set. Coming up to days before the invasion, then everything racks up. We focus on it. We're getting delivered our ammunition. We're screwing away. And then within our groupings and our teams, they're delivering their own team orders. We've got commando level orders, we've had brigade level orders, and obviously the brigadiers went to a general and he's had his orders. So past that, it's down to our teams sorting out exactly what they're going to do tactically amongst themselves on the ground. Once that's done, then we go through rehearsals, which is a bit uncanny considering I'm an actor now and all those theatre of war and the rehearsal. That's exactly what we did. Everything from where you sat on helicopters to the pathway to the helicopters, to loading the helicopters, to coming off the helicopters, what way you would move, what your arcs of fire, your cover that you would give your, mutual support to your other people when you come off the back of the helicopter. That was all rehearsed and we all done. And even within my team, because as we were broken down, my orders at this stage for the team I was going to be operating with, I was myself and my signaller. We were the Bravo headquarters for the Brigade Recce Force. The Alpha headquarters, which include the Brigade Force commander, we had Salt Major with him, and he had his forward air controlling food parties and forward observation officers to control fires, was centrally held with himself. That was the Alpha headquarters. So they had the command and control element within our OP screen when we landed. I, as the Bravo headquarters, was, if something happened to the Alpha headquarters on the ground, then I would facilitate the command and control and bring the teams back in together to move on task in the eventuality that we did hit something, something happened on the ground. Within my team, then there was myself, my signaller, and then we had a 4-man TACP team, or Tactical Air Control Party team. I think it's a JTAC they're called now, but they were called at that time TACPs, and that was involved. There was an officer, and they had 3 signallers, stroke people that would control, and they would speak directly to aviation, attack helicopters, and air, and coordinate the fires onto targets as they came towards us. But I was the subunit commander of that element, and that was our observation team. And I had a signaller which had direct comms link between myself and our Alpha headquarters, and also to 4-2 Commando at the time, their base headquarters. So we came to our rehearsals. So I ended up, we moved back on. We were on, the helicopters were USMC CH-46s, and basically they're like mini Chinooks. They're like the maritime US aviation, US Marine Corps, like they're smaller CH-40 are Chinooks. So you get about maybe section to half troop level, you can get in on board these 46 helicopters. When we went on to the whole for an aviation assault, all the subunits within that aviation assault are put into waves. Obviously, you've got your initial wave, you'll have a second wave, and the helicopters will turn and burn with their support, Cobra attack support, will turn and burn, move around, deliver people, come back, pick more people up and move forward. And we were the first wave on this element, which would be given the green light once 40 Commando had secured the manifold with the Navy SEALs, and they were battling in the southern part of the L4. At that point, that's when we would get our activation order and we would lift off and move forward into our separate different landing sites or LSs and drop off the teams for our task as such. So went through the rehearsals. So again, it was probably days before the actual invasion, and we went through exactly what way we would do it. So we went up, introduced ourselves to our helicopters. So the helicopter that I was doing rehearsals on and I had orders to actually invade with, strangely, was the helicopter that would later crash. And, I'll go through it in a minute, but it was one of those reasons why I wasn't on the helicopter. It's just still is with me and with the people that were in my team or in our team, that, it's just one of those things that there's a certain level of guilt, but I'll clarify that in a moment. As we went back to the helicopter, we got ourselves on board. As we were sitting on the helicopter, Dante, who was the officer in charge of the TACMI team, he sat at the front of the helicopter. I was at the front of the helicopter, so it was facing towards our route of travel. And I sat at the back end on the tailgate. So I was literally clipped in, sitting near enough on the tailgate, adjacent to the US Marine Corps tail gunner who had an M60 machine gun pointed at the back of the aircraft. So from my seating position, the tailgate's open. I can see basically the path we're traveling on. Can't see forward, but I can see everything looking out the back of the helicopter. So we took off on a rehearsal. It's a bit of a whirlwind, should we say, a bit of a, because a lot of the aviation and the pilots, they were just getting used to using their night vision equipment, moving and flying in very limited light, and also landing on. And in the desert, you land on in a brownout. So as the helicopter comes into land, that force of the blades pushing down makes this massive cloud of sand, and they have to land blind, really. And they trust a lot to their crew and that, leaning over and making sure that we land on safe enough, on the ground and move on task. So we went through it, done it. We had a bit of a hard landing in the rehearsals, landed on, helicopter shut down, and we all went back to our, should we say, because obviously the rehearsal that we're doing for the invasion is exactly the same. So we go to the back, confirmation, get in the back of the helicopter turns and burns, move off, the helicopters fly in their formation into their order of march, then land and drop off in a specific site for the OP with mutual support as they're doing, and then it banks and moves away. So we got up to the point doing a dummy landing at our actual target area, and then we just recovered back, and that was the rehearsal done. So it was a successful rehearsal. It was a bit of a scary and daring flight, but that was to be expected because everyone was just getting themselves ready for the actual operation. I got back to our tents, and we all, reunited again with the rest of the command element, and we had a little chuckle to ourselves that, this is it. That's the rehearsals done. Everything now. We've got orders. We know exactly what we're doing. Orders have been given at every level, and we're ready for the invasion. Everyone in a way is, chomping at the bit. This is what we're here for. This is to do our job, and let's do it as professionally as best we can. So within the next 24 hours, we get, it looks like it's going to happen tonight. And obviously the trigger would be 40 Commando and Andy Merry and his merry bunch of men would be landed on with the Navy SEALs to do, carry out their part of the operation. And then we would follow on. So the next night, getting dark, that's it. It's happening. We're moving out. So there we are. We've got all our ammunition, our rations. We're good to go. We've got our orders. We've got all our, what we call actions on. So if something happens, this is what we do. So everyone knows as part of that orders process, what happens if, and I think we'd covered everything, even the eventuality, I would say, that did actually come, but not expecting it to actually happen. So I went up to the back of the helicopter that we'd done the rehearsals on, reintroduced myself. Well, I was about to reintroduce myself to the pilot, and already our Alpha headquarters were lined up to the rear of that helicopter. And I went over and seen Jace Ward, God bless him, my OC, Mark Strafford, my Sergeant Major, John Cecil, our SIGs one, and the rest of the gang, and give the old, hey, what's happening, dudes? This is my helicopter. And they go, no, change the helicopters. We're swapping helicopters. You're on the next one now. I was like, whoa, hold on a second. This is too important. Your LS is fine. If we get this overlap, it could be something that would come out of this, which wouldn't be favorable if we don't get this right. Mm-hmm. So I went across to the new pilot, had a chat with him, and it was quite assuring to know that he'd actually flown with the the Commando Helicopter Force, flying our Sea Kings. So he had been on exchange before. So he's a 46 pilot, but he'd flown Sea Kings before. And he, chatting to him, he still had that US Marine Corps with a bit of a Navy Jack speed chat with him. And so it was nice meeting him. It was quite, like I say, it was assuring. So I had a chat with him, confirmed that the LSs were all good and everything was tickety-boo, for us to go. And again, we're back to see our guy and going, right, it's happening. 40 are fighting on the ground. We're going to be taking off now. So this is, I'd say before we take off, minus 5 minutes, big hugs, big handshakes, see you on the ground, see you all when we link up again. Shook hands with the Alpha headquarters. I'm in a helicopter next to them. And in the formation, the way we're flying now is, I'm trying to do this verbally and explain where I am. So I'm sitting, as we take off, I'm sitting at the back of a CH-46, looking out to the rear of this 46, half right or 7 o'clock from my position. If looking back out of the helicopter is 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, my position is the helicopter that I should have been on, that the Alpha headquarters was on. And I'm looking at it and I can see it. And it's that clear. I'm map reading as well, because when we take off, there's a certain route that we're going to follow, which we've seen on orders, which is going to follow the main road up through Kuwait, over the border. Then we go across Bubian Island, across the sea. Then we move across into the L4 and land into our target area or our subject area. And as we're taking off, I look across and I can see clearly the helicopter, that I should have been on. And I can actually see the pilots inside the cab by the green glow of their goggles, their night flying goggles that they're wearing. And I remember seeing that, and also ticking off, you could see a lot of, oil plants as you move along. And they've got the night, I think Sarah talks about it, those candles. You can see the candle. It makes it easy for you to go, and you've got a checklist going, I know exactly where we are. So I was navigating this as we were going across from looking out the back of the helicopter. And I got a message from the front said 2 minutes. So 2 minutes we're going to be landing on, and that's where we own our destiny then, I feel, at that point. As we're flying, checked over, up the road, I've checked off the different places. I know where we are in navigation. I know we're going to cut away now, go across the sea for a small piece, across Bubian Island, which is a very flat, very similar to the L4. It's almost like a delta plane. So it's like, it's very near sea level, over the top of Bubian Island, and then would be a small breach of water, and then we go across again into the L4. 2 minutes came, and then I could feel, and you could feel the helicopter banking. I know where I am, where my position globally in the world is. I know exactly where I am as we're moving. And then we started banking right again, and banking right, and banking right. And this really, if you think logically, when you turn in, that this has got to be some sort of 360. And as we go, I realized we're back over Bubian Island again. And then we were back over into Kuwait again. And we'd done a full loop of the into our target area. The 2 minutes had gone now. We're back over into Kuwait again. And just as we turned back onto that road that we'd followed initially, just as we started moving and come back on the line, heading towards the L4, I've got this image looking out the back of, and at this point in time, and I think I spoke to you, Steve, about it before, I didn't realize it was that something I'd really seen, or was it just something that happened because it was so instantaneous? I've got this image of the helicopter that I was looking at just diving straight away, just going completely vertical towards the deck. And then in that instant of it going that way, there's just an instant blast. We're flying at 100 feet. That helicopter's behind us, and it's landed below us and blown up with a lot of fuel on board. And again, at this point, I didn't realize that that's exactly what happened. So I didn't. All I realized was potentially we'd been hit because we were like bang, caught in the blast wave. Our helicopter itself nearly goes vertical itself. And we've got flames basically on our helicopter. You know, it's there. The blast it's inside your head. And we've lost it. And you can feel it. You can feel the heat, you feel the pressure, and then you land back on again. And we're still flying through. But I'm looking straight out of the back, and I see this massive fireball right in my vision for the whole rest of the route until I got mission aborted, right in front of us. And I'm looking down, and as we're flying away from that fireball, I can see debris at the base of it. And I turned to Pricey, my signaller, and I said, I think that's a helicopter. And remember, at this time, the thoughts in my head is, have we been hit by something? Was that small arms fire? Has something blown up underneath that we flew over? It still hadn't, that image that was in my head hadn't connected yet. And then we got mission aborted. So obviously something's happened. We didn't get, what is it? Mission abort. So mission abort, again, another 360, and we landed on again at the exact same spot that we'd taken off initially during the invasion. What I find out later on is the reason that we'd done the extra dog leg or back around again to where we started was because the Cobra attack helicopter hadn't sanitized our LSs. And that came out later at a coroner's inquest. And that was the reason why we didn't land on initially the first time. And as we come round to the dog legs, then at this point, I didn't know. Then as we came to this explosion and we got mission aboard. So the helicopter landed, we landed on back in Kuwait, and I got off, first person off the back of the helicopter's closing down, and I see a man. This is still dark. We're still in the early hours of the 21st. And I see a man dressed as a civilian, and the first one he goes, and he says to me, what happened to Dash 3 or Dash 7? I can't remember the Dash number, but that was the name of the call sign for the helicopter. What happened to Dash 7? And I was like going, Dash 7? And he goes, do you have any reporters on your aircraft? And I'm going, no. And then I looked across and seen that the helicopter hadn't went back to where it was beside us. And I was going, and everything just went, that was our lads. They're all dead. There's no way anyone could have survived that. But the guy at the back in the civvies, I said, look, we haven't got a reporter. I don't think there was a reporter on there, but I know Oliver North is in one of the other craft. And Oliver North is quite, infamous, famous, or whatever, but he's basically was the former US Marine Corps colonel that lied for the president, apparently, in Nicaragua. But this man in front of me, he said, no, I'm Oliver North. So the first person I met off the back of the helicopter was Oliver North. And that realization that we've lost all our lads. Mm-hmm. And that lads are all our Alpha headquarters. So at this point in time, I say, guys, stay here. Sorry, Oliver, I've got to just go and inform 4-2 Commando. We're up con to 4-2 Commando at the time. And where the control run by the second in command of 4-2 Commando was being run out of a tent about 800 to a kilometer away from me in the desert. It's a massive, sort of division, of helicopters that were moving. So it was quite a way, but there was a little, through my goggles, I could see there was an infrared light on top of it to identify what it was. So I could see it in the darkness of the desert. And it's just dawn starting to happen. And as I walk through out of the dark, in the desert towards it, it starts getting more and more light. And I can see when I get towards the tent that the second in command, Rob McGowan, who later became the Commandant General of the Royal Marines, he's outside the tent holding a handset with a radio, trying to speak into a radio discreetly on the side of the tent. And I'm walking towards him. And I know Rob from previous experience in the Royal Marines. And he's going, and he just looked at me and he said, "You were dead." And I said, look, I'm not dead, but all of our lads are dead. You know what I mean? There's no way anyone could have survived that. And he was going, well, who's dead? I said, well, the Alpha headquarters. And at that stage, and at this point in time, this is where, remember, I spoke to you before about the white cards. When the helicopters had changed, the white cards hadn't changed. So this is a good maybe an hour after the actual crash. By the time I've come back, we've landed on, and I'm back out of the desert, and I've walked up. So the white cards hadn't changed. So at this point in time, until I seen Rob, myself and the TAC Bay team I was working with, and all the US Marine Corps guys on the helicopter were the people that had lost their lives. It was only then that we realized that it was our Alpha headquarters. So that's a big chunk and a big hit for any organization to take. And we're talking some extreme quality of human beings that were on that flight across the board, including the US Marine Corps people. And there was a massive realization, because it's getting light and those, we call them the jungle drums, are beating so loud. So in a lot of respects, a lot of my friends across the whole of the armed forces, the Corps, whether it be from special forces all the way back to all our different elements, they had already heard that potentially I'd lost my life, I'd been lost. And I got to say that I'm extremely thankful it wasn't me, but the sadness is I lost such close friends, and in a very short space of time, from chatting to them to holding their hands to giving them a hug, they disintegrate underneath you, and that's it. You forever, that will never leave my memory. But the white cards hadn't been changed. So as the helicopters took off, my team was still on the old helicopter, and the Alpha team was still on my new helicopter. So that was an element. And I know it from personalities and people that I've spoken to, the NODICAS of the event of somebody does die in operations, there has to be a chain that has to go through to, and I call it, relatives have to be NODICAS. I've been told that their loved one is either dead or injured on operations. And that had got as far as the UK and the chain for them to actually start lining up and triggering people to go and give this notification. And again, we've seen it in films and all that there, and it's extremely sad. And I've heard of some of the scenarios of that night and also in future operations, and it's an extremely traumatic and sad occasion for anybody. And I think, Paula's story just tells the whole thing and tells the trauma. That moment just changes everyone's life for forever. So I can understand that. But I think, luckily, even though those jungle drums are beating extremely loud now, nobody's officially been able to pass anything on. And it got as far as the UK. And luckily, it was a good friend of mine, was the Corps casualty officer. And he knew me, and he knew my family, and who I was. And when he got the news initially, because at that point in time I was dead, as as the rest of the guys, on my craft, their families would have conceived or perceived could have been. He said, look, before he'd done any sort of action points, he had to have 30 seconds breather just to go, because this is the start of the invasion, and these are our first casualties. This is what's happened. And in that 30 seconds, the phone call went, whoa, stop. And it had to be reconfigured. And that trauma, the delivery of that message then had to go to the real, the correct people, which is, even the thought of it now is it's so sad thinking about it. But it has to be done. It has to be done properly as well. And it did happen. And
so was there a risk, Tip, that the wrong families would have been notified? Is that what you're saying? Because of the confusion,
it could have been. I think it's also, we've got to see that even though we'd been in Afghanistan before that, and Kosovo, and the operations, Bosnia, and all the operations that the armed forces have been involved in, throughout the last decades, I think this was the first, since the Falklands, really, the first battle, and it's wrong. It's wrong to even say that. Not battle. It's the first sort of kinetic full-on invasion since the Falklands. So when the process was being run out, it hadn't been run out for a long time, and it hadn't been sort of run out with the tech level that we have now, which is so much more sophisticated and better. So it was good. Maybe the fact that I walked from where I was to go and inform that this is what's happened, and with the understanding that they knew what was happening, but at that point in time, because the white cards hadn't changed, they were doing the right process. But then there's that which, it's hard for me to say on these means, but there's that, why was the order changed? Why is every single person connected with that, our invasion? Where did the order come for that change in a helicopter? At what level? When each level, nobody was aware of it until that point. And that's not, I'm not saying it's a failing. I'm just saying that there's something there. And I don't know whether I don't know what it is. At the end of the day, it's still, I lost, 8 very close friends who I'd endured quite a bit with through Kosovo, Afghanistan, and now Iraq. And, that will always leave me unsettled for the rest of my days. But I'm here to talk about them and their memories, so that maybe even my new career as an actor is purely I'm credible as an actor because I got so much life experience from these wonderful people that can't be here to tell the story. And if I can in some way just talk about them and keep their memories alive, then that's the best I can do. That's what I can do. And let people not sympathize, but empathize with their sacrifice or their will to protect what we call freedom.
To this day, you still don't know quite how you were moved off that helicopter, how the helicopters were changed.
No, honestly, there's no, I haven't, I mean, maybe coming from this chat, there might be, but is a few people say, well, no, honestly, I've never had the executive of why those helicopters changed. And if you look at it, I should be dead now and my other friends should be talking about me, but it's a different scenario.
Does that make you feel, is there any guilt there on your part for having survived that? I mean, survivor's guilt. I'm not wishing to put words into your mouth, but you must think about this a lot. I mean, that's a pretty life-changing event by any measure.
Yeah, I mean, guilt, no, because I feel that I'm a Royal Marines Commando, really, or now an actor, but I feel I'm a decent human being. So guilt, I think, would be wasted. Positivity, to bring it forward, is just that I get an opportunity to talk about some incredible people. And if I can do that, then that's the best I can do for them. But for me, guilt, no. But and I didn't know that mega, or that, is there a God? Is there a reason why we're here? Is there a time and place when you're meant to be taken off this existence? And that's the tragedy of life, I think. We're all going to die, but it's just the old, I'm passionate about our veterans taking their own lives and why they do it. But it's also those times where, my time in the military, you've always had orders to be where you are, and there's a reason why you're there in that place. And what I don't like when you're on operation is a bit of what I call military tourism. Sometimes sometimes like people go, all right, they want to be part of it. They want to be in there, and they want to say they've done their bit. But if they're not supposed to be there, they don't be there, and that's important. And I'm not saying that was the case in this scenario, but it was just that I've never done anything. And there's certain scenarios with my friends that were on board helicopter, potentially they may not have been on that helicopter, for whatever reasons. And people in my organization, I know why. And it's not for negative reasons, but potentially they may not have been on that helicopter. Only either a choice, a quirk, or an order that made it different. And I don't feel guilt. I value what I have now more than I could ever value because of what we lost there, but because of that, in that split second, that decision has made me have, my family, my new career, what I mean? And those people won't have that, and their families have had to endure that loss for so long. And you will, no matter what you say, when you lose somebody in operations, and your life changes. End of story. Your life changes forever.
You're talking about there's two things that are striking me here: is the kind of duty and the responsibility you've taken on to keep their stories alive, to share those stories through the medium of acting, but more as a personal responsibility. But also, it feels, the way you're describing it, and that's maybe because you're describing it quite eloquently, given how difficult it is, it feels like almost like a spiritual experience, the way you're talking about it.
It is, but because of, and as we moved on from that episode of the whole, my experience in Iraq, it was quite surreal. So it's like that, and maybe in my new career as well, they have never, the guys and their memories and them as human beings have never left me. And even to a certain extent, when we moved, because we come back, straight away reconfigured, US Marine Corps moved on task, and we went in with the RAF and Navy Sea Kings and carried on with the task. But at that, every point in time through it, I kept, even though I seen it with my own eyes, I felt it, I was part of it, I thought, maybe it was just a bit wrong. Maybe the lads are going to rock up and go, you won't believe what happened. We were on this helicopter, ended up on top, parked on an American ship, and, what's it like, communications, this. You always thought that would happen. You never thought that really, actually, I never thought, or at times I thought it was surreal, and it never really happened. It's just in my head or my memory. But it didn't. And that's the hardened truth, is when you hit the ground afterwards, you've got to just move with it. And you've got to do it to the memory and respect of the professionalism and the human spirit of those people that never made it that day.
Well, I think their stories are in the right hands in terms of keeping them alive with yourself. And I think it's important. I'm going to say work that you do, because I think it's patently obvious how important this is to you, and I can understand why. And I think keep doing what you're doing.
I mean, on the lighthearted side, all I am is a storyteller. I'm an actor who's a storyteller now, and if I can keep doing what I'm doing, and I mean, even now, like, we haven't got much time, but the adventure, or not the adventure, shall we say it was an adventure, because we were, it's what we do, it's our business, and again, it's what all of those people that we lost in the helicopter do as well. The adventure after that was, in a way, something you'd read in the old Victory magazines or comics, or the Commando comics, what we've done and what we moved on with, and the professionalism and the spirit, the resilience of the guy, the people I work with in the Brigade Recce Force. And I can say this wholeheartedly, and even people listening to this, was second to none. Those people were not only legends there, but they would go on to become legends of the Royal Marines and in the Army and in the wider services. So, we were very lucky to have such quality within the organization that we worked in. And we managed to, in a way, pick ourselves up and do all those guys that died justice. And that organization continued to do that throughout operations, right up to its current image, which is the SRS, which is the Surveillance and Reconnaissance Squadron in 3 Commando Brigade, or the Commando Forces now, as we are, rather than 3 Commando Brigade.
And the reason why we're doing this podcast is to tell these stories, to give people an insight to individual stories and how diverse they are and how experiences are different, and people's, even when they're witnessing the same events, people often describe different things, don't they? And I think that's what we're trying to do, is share those stories, tell people how you saw it or the other guests saw it, and that's the important thing that we're trying to achieve here.
No, it is. I could say, like we were talking about before, Steve, is I do have to scribe this down and write it, and I want to put it together and be able to impart to people or let people become into the world of the life that we experienced and that I experienced in that journey as a Royal Marine before becoming an actor. And I suppose a bit as becoming an actor, but more so as a Royal Marine. So procrastination, I have to put to bed and just get my lazy honking Irish head out of my backside and just write it down to keep those memories of our people alive.
Absolutely. Start writing. As you know, if there's anything we can do to help in any small way, even if it's just acting as a sounding board, I'd be delighted to help. But I think it would be a book worth reading and written for all the right reasons. Thank you ever so much.
And thank you.
Before you go, if you're a member of the Armed Forces community and need support with your mental health, Op Courage can help. Use the link in this podcast description for details. Or you can phone the Combat Stress Helpline on 0800 138 1619. If you'd like to contact us, email studio@companyofmakers.com.
Finally, we're giving a really big shout out to our funders, the Royal Navy and Royal Marines Charity, and the Armed Forces Covenant Fund Trust. Thank you.
This podcast was produced by Rachel Owen, hosted by Tip Cullen and me, recorded and edited by yours truly.
Company of Makers. Podcast Talks Workshops.